Section 4 is all about Colonial Society. Now there are going to be 6 PowerPoints in this section, so bear with us and we'll get through all of it. The very first one is we're going to look at Colonial Society and see how it is set up. So in the beginning, we have trade goods, very much the barter system. They're less worried about monetary wealth, more worried about tangible property. And if you remember what I told you before in earlier recordings, that it's all about land equals wealth. The more land you have, the more wealth you have. So they want more land. It's one reason why so many individuals are going to come to the New World, to the colonies, and establish themselves. There's a lot of rapid growth through commercial agriculture. They're starting to get to the point where they are growing extra beyond what is needed for themselves. So now they're selling off this extra amount of goods, and in the beginning, as the barter system, so they're trading that off for services. Jobs such as blacksmithing, tanners, barbers, those items. So they would have, farmers would have this excess goods, and then they would trade those, that excess off for work to be done for them. Blacksmiths making tools for the farmer. That kind of thing. And then in doing so, with this growth, they want political security and they want religious freedom as well. So it's really going to help the colonies establish themselves in a situation where they are very much more self-reliant on themselves and less reliant on Great Britain. Creve Coeur, J. Hector St. John de Creve Coeur. Creve Coeur is an explorer. He's explored quite a lot of places. One of the things he's going to do is explore down the Mississippi River. He said that the colonies melted into a new race of men whose labors and posterity, meaning their children and their grandchildren, would one day cause great change in the world. And he foresaw that if the American colonies continued to be reliant only on themselves, that individualism, that kind of can-do attitude would get them further along. And it is possible that they could get to a point where they could be independent and then could gain a lot of power within themselves because of the confidence that the American colonies had. So who is our typical colonist? Well, most of them are under the age of 25. They're male, they're single, and they're poor. Over half of them are going to come as indentured servants or as slaves. And when they get here, their goal is to work to gain enough money that they could buy land, and then after they have that, they would bring the rest of the family over. Or they would, go find a wife and then establish themselves here. Land is very plentiful and is very cheap, especially if you use the headright system, or you go into one of those colonies where they're giving land away for any 2 people who's willing to stay. Indentures come in hopes of land when their contract is done. A lot of enterprising immigrants are going to get here. Some of them very skilled workers. And so your colonists, when they get here, there's a lot of upbeat attitude, a lot of positivity for these individuals because they are here on their own fruition. They're coming because they want to be here. A lot of them are. And so that's going to really help them. It doesn't really, just because they have that can-do attitude does not mean that they're going to do well. One of the things that we have is what is called the seasoning. Many are going to die due to disease or starvation. Only 1 in 6 of them are going to die within the first 3 months. 1 in 6 children who are going to be born here are going to die before the age of 1. And very much half of all the colonists who do arrive do not make it through their first winter. In 1750, however, by then the population is growing on its own. there is massive immigration that's coming in, and it's going to pass over 1 million colonists. The birth rate is high, so that's going to help. In just 25 years, another 1.5 million colonists are going to arrive in the colonies, and it's just going to grow so quickly. And so this really helps them get established because they're growing so fast. So the colonial family, the idea is you got married around the age of 20 to really get started. The average age for individuals in the colonies for Europeans was 40 to 45. So getting married around 20 was a good idea. It's very much lower than back at home. Back at home in England, women got married around 25, men around the age of 30. So really pushing for them to get married earlier. The average birth rate, 10 to 15 children. That's a lot of kids. 20 in some cases. There are estimated in the colonial period, the number one killer of women in the colonial period is childbirth. 25 to 50% of women die in childbirth. So it's the number one reason for women dying in the colonial period. Many children do not make it to the age of 20. The average age in the South for the colonies for a while is 16. So very young, very much a situation where you have teenagers who could possibly be making decisions for plantations and the like. So it was a very different society in the South than it was in the northern parts of the colonies. Prejudice is going to be everywhere. It is something that's been ingrained in our society from the very beginning, mainly because the English have this ideology when they get here that if it's different from them, they are scared of it, and they don't like it. So they're going to have problems in that. Nativism is a term that you need to know. Nativism is supporting those who are born in the colonies over those who have immigrated. And a lot of nativists, in the beginning, they don't care what your skin color is. They don't care about your ethnic background. If you're born here, then you're okay. But if you're born somewhere else and then come in, that's a problem. So that's what nativism is. But eventually racism will get ingrained in American society. Fear of those who are different from themselves. The English will associate the color of black as evil or dark. And therefore, African Americans and natives are considered to be savage or heathens. And this is going to be perpetuated by the Christian ideology of the time, where they will use the Bible in support of slavery, saying that, well, it's in the Bible, therefore it must be okay. So we have this as part of our society. And then women as well will be suppressed. Under the Christian idea, women are seen as weak. They're seen as unable to think as well as a man. They are seen as subjects or property of their husbands and fathers. If you challenge authority in any way, you could be punished. And punishment equals a few things. It could be restrictions put upon you. It also could be beatings. They could beat you for not following the rules. Or in some cases, if you defied your father or your husband, you could be institutionalized on the grounds that you are going against the norm, so there must be something wrong with you. So lots of things that could happen to a woman if she challenged authority. Some rules for women: you could not vote. You did not have the ability to hold office. You could not be educated. Many places throughout the country at that time, if you were a woman, you were not allowed to be educated. Learning how to read was one thing. You could learn how to read. That way you could read the Bible, just like Elizabeth I wanted you to. But other than that, education was not something that happened. You cannot sign contracts or sue someone. You're not allowed to have any religious positions as well. So there the big thing is women were not considered to be citizens at that time, because they're subjects or property. So if you're not allowed to, if you're not a citizen, you have no legal right to do anything. No, you can't. That's why you can't sign a contract. You can't legally do anything. So it was very oppressive. Women's work at the time was expected to do everything from the home: cook, clean, raise the children, gather wood, because you constantly needed wood in New England to stay warm. And all the money that would be earned would go to whatever the male figure in their life was. One of the things that was required of a wife is, if your husband got sick and he was the town blacksmith, who's going to run the smithy? Well, the wife is. Even though they were considered to be too weak or, too dumb to do things, women were expected to step in and fill that role if a man was sick, until the man got back on his feet. And so it was a very high double standard. Prostitution was one of the only jobs for women out there that was purely, for women. Girls as young as 12 would be pushed into prostitution to make money for their families. So it wasn't something that easily people went into, but it was something that women could use to earn money for their families. In New England, a lot of them began with requests for township grants. Land was divided based on who invested more into the buildings of the town and who was closer to the religious ideology there. So the more Anglican you were, more likely you would get more. So the rich obviously got more things because they could provide more money, and the poor got shafted. So they did not get as much as before. But you could sign on as an indenture and then come and work the lands of the rich that were there. And that way, as a person, you were supporting the colony, even though monetarily you couldn't add to it. So it's very harsh living conditions in New England and the middle colonies. A lot of places you can't grow much of anything, and so fishing became the number one food source for the colonies. Cod fishing is the first major imports that they have. Nearly 1/3 of all British ships in the 1700s will be built in the colonies because of the abundance of timber that we had. In the middle colonies, they're going to produce the surplus of food. They're the ones that are going to basically feed New England in the South, because of the areas that's there. So this is Pennsylvania, the open fields of New York. They have lots of areas for farming to happen. So they're going to really feed everything. And they're the group that most predominantly uses the headright system to get individuals into their colonies to work those fields. The most common culture of the time, in the mid-1700s, the standard of living is on the rise. Capitalism really take hold. So this idea that changing it from land equals wealth to money equals wealth is going to be ingrained in the early to mid-1700s. So the South is the exception. They're very much going to stick to property equals wealth. The more property you have, this is either land or slaves, the more wealth that you have. But capitalism really takes hold in New England, in that area. English merchants, however, only want to get paid in what is known as specie. Specie is gold and silver coins. It's the exact term for gold and silver coins in the colonial period, specie. Colonists are relying on barter until they can make paper money for themselves, and each colony tends to make their own paper money. Very few colonies could you use that paper money other places, but they do have paper money within their colonies that you can use. Not a lot of it is backed in the beginning by major things such as gold. Today we have the gold standard. All our money is based on gold here in the United States. but then you didn't necessarily have to have it backed with something. So colonial merchants, each colony making its own paper money. The colonial city is going to grow. About 10% of the population lives in the city. Most of them are farmers and workers who live outside of the city, but that 10% population is in the city. They're going to gain monetary wealth, and this is the drive for business. So these individuals who do not have access to large, pieces of land, they're the ones that are going to perpetuate the idea that money equals wealth. So these business owners. The wealthy are merchants, property owners. 2/3 of the urban males are skilled tradesmen at that time. Cities were rampant, however, with epidemics, fires, crime, violence, a lot of social concerns. So it wasn't a pleasant place to live. But there are, as we know, people who prefer that. They prefer to be around a lot of people. They prefer to be close and stacked on top of each other. They really like that. They don't like the, big, huge openness of farm life where, your next neighbor could be 10 miles down the road. So they like that, ability, that ready access to another human being. So interactions between human beings. So these social concerns that are now going to pop up in cities really revolve around the poor and the homeless. How are we going to take care of the poor? How do we take care of the homeless? Later in the 1800s with the Industrial Revolution, a lot of individuals who are poor are going to flock to cities because that's where factories are. But the social concern starts here in the beginning, in the early 1700s, of how do we take care of these people? What are we going to do about this? Urban culture is very different than farms. In the urban society, we have a rise of inns and taverns. They become very important. They're the biggest social institutions in the colonial society because everyone goes there. They're the restaurant, they're the meeting house, they're the place for social drinking. Americans have always loved to drink. It doesn't take very long after the founding of the American colonies before our first stills go into place. Alcohol brewers begin. So alcohol has always been a part of American society. The local publican, also known as the pub owner, becomes local leaders because they know everybody. Everybody comes to their tavern to talk, and so they get to know quite a few individuals. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, the first anti-tavern laws go into place. They're rarely enforced because one of the things they do in pubs is that's where they go to protest against government, where they talk out about how they don't like about government. In the Massachusetts Bay Colony, if you remember, government and church are the exact same thing. So the head of church and the head of government are the same person. So it's going to be really hard for them to get rid of these. So taverns become a very central place to colonial society. Some changes that will happen in 1710, we have the parliamentary law that sets up the postmaster general in the colonies for communication. It led to the expansion of colonial newspapers as well, because now people can get mail. And they needed a central location for spreading communications because it was chaotic then. And England itself wanted a place for individuals to easily communicate, one between the colonies and with England itself. So that's why we have the Postmaster General. While colonists are the most literate in the world because of, remember, under Elizabeth in the beginning in the 1600s, she pushed out that everybody needs to learn to read. They do this to emphasize the reading of the Bible. In 1647, the Massachusetts Bay Colony is going to establish a grammar school in every part of the colony itself. This is very rare in the South. They prefer to use tutors instead. But the idea of a grammar school in 1647 really gets ingrained, and then it slowly filters out to other colonies. So between the ages of 7 to 10, you would go to grammar school, and this is one place where they could teach you to read and teach you basic education. You would go for a few years to make sure you know everything, and then you would then, once you're old enough, just work on the family farm or within the family business. You would become an apprentice to a master of some kind of skill. And so these changes are really going to get ingrained to establish who and what the colonies are prior to the American Revolution. The ethnic makeup of the colonies. Who can be a citizen? Well, there are two types of citizenry. One is birthright citizen. This is people who are born in that colony. They're born there, therefore they're meant to be a citizen, or those who immigrated in. And in the beginning, if you were a guy, then you were basically accepted to be a citizen. Women in the beginning were not expected to be citizens. They were not thought of as citizens. So if you were an immigrant, how long did you have to be here before you could be a citizen? The general idea is 4 years. And then you had to take an oath of allegiance to that colony for you to be able to be a citizen of it. The rights that would be included for these men included property ownership, voting or holding office, requesting and receiving royal grants as well. So there's a lot of things that men could do at that time. In 1740, our first naturalization law is going to go into place in the colonies, and it's going to restrict immigration even more. So 7 years, and then take the loyalty oath, and you have to be a Protestant. So they really didn't want anybody who wasn't a Protestant in this area. And it's going to take a long time before this idea even is, thinking of someone in leadership other than a Protestant. Our first Catholic president was JFK, and that was in the mid-1900s. So, and even then, he is the only non-Protestant that we've had in the presidency. Our ethnic groups at that time, 61% were English, 14% were Scotch-Irish. Scotch-Irish are different than regular Irish. Scotch-Irish are those who had Scottish heritage, and then a large group of them came into Ireland, settled for a while, a few generations, and then they're going to pick up and come to the colonies as colonists. So 14%, Germans 9%, the Dutch, French, and Swiss equal 5% of the population. The Irish themselves, 4%. And then what were considered unidentified, 7%. These are slaves. These are Native Americans. These are Asian individuals. Those individuals they never, really wanted to think about. Those were that 7%. So they were counted as people, but it was never listed who or what they are because of who or what they are. So that is generally immigration in itself. So our next section is going to be about Native Americans and the colonies.